This is really sad that he'd fled Somalia because of the danger over there and the violence, and then come to the UK thinking this was like his safe place, and then ended up being brutally murdered here.
Yeah, and again without any reason.
Just a quick disclaimer, the content presented in this podcast is based on real events and may contain graphic descriptions of violence, crime scenes and other disturbing material. Listener discretion is advised. This episode is sponsored by Think Forensic.
Think Forensic are a one-stop shop for all things forensic science and crime solving. They hold experience days, as well as corporate events, team building events and general education for primary school right the way up to university level, as well as other events and consultancy. There's also a shop where you can get your hands on all things crime solving, from evidence gathering to packaging and collecting evidence, as well as other forensic science equipment.
For more information or to book on an experience day, please visit the website. Hi everyone, and welcome back to episode 21 of the Grave Secrets podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Annie.
And I'm Beth. Today we've got another case study for you. It's quite an interesting, it's quite a complicated case.
Yeah, I thought this was quite, there's a lot to pack into it, isn't there?
Yeah, but before we get started, we thought we'd just give you a bit of an insight as to what we've been up to. We've both been incredibly busy.
We have, haven't we? I don't even know how we've had time to fit anything in.
No.
I feel like I've just been flat out constantly every single day.
Ridiculous.
My gym schedule's out of the window. Even people at the gym was like, well, where are you? Like, have you just disappeared? Even the PT yesterday was like, I have not seen you. Have you been ill? And I was like, no, but I might as well have been.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
No, I've just been busy.
I've just been so busy, it's making me ill.
But yours is quite, you've got reason to be busy as in like interesting work-wise, haven't you?
Yeah, it's all been super good, so we're not complaining, but we are a little bit.
Yeah,
just want to lie in.
Just one day.
But yes, very exciting news, because Think Forensic, where we work, we have been moving premises.
This is exciting, and I've not seen the new premises yet, but we'll have to pop over and have a look.
Yeah, what's been really funny, well, first of all, I should have huge muscles by now, because I've actually been helping move things.
Have you?
Yeah, with my platform Crocs on. They've all been like, oh my God.
I wouldn't expect anything less.
No. Yeah, it seems foolish with the platform Crocs, but actually I reckon quite essential, because they are padded and I had a blister. So I am not, you'll not be surprised to hear this, but I am not one of the Croc lovers. And people keep saying you will be converted. If you just put some on your feet, you'll be converted. Like, wear the Crocs. And I've never... I find it interesting because I love them and I would have more pairs, but I don't think they're like like I couldn't do a day at the seaside just in Crocs.
So they're not like the comfort thing for you?
No.
Honestly, all my friends, my sister's got them. They're like, just wear the Crocs. And to be honest, if I am at Holly's house, I will put them on and go outside and do something, but I wouldn't ever think to wear them. And I'm just one of the anti-Crocs. But I mean, I must admit, you've got some very nice colours that match every outfit.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, you maybe convert me one day.
But yeah, so we have been moving premises. It's all very exciting, but there's an awful lot of construction work going on.
Right.
And which we're all doing. Well, I say we're all doing ourselves. Like, I've been moving plasterboard, but Sue's the one that's been putting in the legwork. But it's just been hilarious because we've got like a half-built wall, and I'm doing a little wall mural on it, and they're like hammering and nailing in on the other side. So they're doing all of the like really intense stuff,
and you're doing the artwork.
Yeah, so I feel really bad, but I mean, someone's got to do the pretty stuff, haven't they?
Yeah, and I'm sure it'll be worth it, and when we've all done, because you did the ones in the office, in the place now, didn't you?
Yeah.
We'll have to take some photos on our Instagram and actually do a little tour of when Think Forensic has moved.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And so, so if you are planning on booking any experiences with Think Forensic, which you should obviously definitely do, it will be in the new premises, which is super exciting because it's new and improved version.
Yeah.
So
I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of exciting news going on.
I know. So apart from that, one of the things that we are always talking about at work at Think Forensic is the importance of evidence, and we say it's a bit like a jigsaw, don't we? So when we go into like schools generally, we say that the way that the court case is built works like a jigsaw would, where you need all of the different elements to fit together to then make a case that will be good enough, suitable to be used in court.
Yeah, a lot of people think you just sort of find one piece of evidence and it is like a match or a fingerprint match and that's it, but it's not that straightforward. There's lots of evidence that all links together to build the case.
Yeah, and again, even if you've got someone that's saying that they were there, if you've got like witness statements or you've got a confession maybe, if they then retract that confession, you've got to have other evidence
to back it up, to
prove that they were in fact there. And I thought when we were researching this case, it was a really good example of that fact. It was quite a struggle initially, I think, for them to find a lot of evidence that was really good, but that's where the forensic investigators are just so crucial, because they just keep chipping away at what there is, and then inevitably
find something. Yeah.
So without further ado, I will introduce today's case. So we are looking into the murder of Saeed Akbar Mohamed Ahmed today. It's quite a recent one, again, in kind of relation to some of the others.
Yeah.
It was 2020 that this case occurred. And I was in Birmingham just this weekend, when we're filming. So we thought we would do a case that was based around the Birmingham area.
Yeah, I don't think we've done a Birmingham one before.
No, we haven't. We've kind of done different areas of the Midlands, but we've not really done Birmingham yet.
We're working our way around.
Yeah. So this is a tricky case in that it kind of looked initially like an open and shut case, an open and shut investigation. But what made it really complicated was that there was seemingly no motive, really, and that despite having multiple witnesses of the murder, forensic evidence was initially really difficult to get hold of.
Yeah, it definitely was.
So it's one of those where, like, it looks easy to begin with, but then you actually go, oh no, this is a lot more complicated.
When you dig into it.
Yeah, than we first thought.
So the victim, Saeed, was a 34-year-old man, and this was in the Sparkbrook area of Birmingham. And it was a seemingly unprovoked attack, and it was down to digital forensics and a lot of CCTV evidence that actually tracked down the suspect as he was trying to flee the country.
In this case, quite good CCTV as well. Like, we've talked about it before, and we've said that quite often it's quite grainy and they don't get enough good
it was very clear
from it, but in this case it worked well, didn't it?
It did, yeah. So how it all started was with a 999 call made to the police on the 16th of March 2020, and that was when the operator found out that a man had been fatally stabbed at the scene. So the first thing to do in this situation, it was the 999 call was pretty hectic, and people on the phone were saying he is not breathing. We think he might be dying. There is blood everywhere. So the operator in this case would send out the paramedics straight away to that address. And the first rule at a crime scene is preservation of life. So if you've got someone in there, the paramedics will go straight in there, and they will not be thinking about sort of contaminating the scene. They'll not be thinking about anything to do with that. It will all be just preserving that life. So that can be a good thing if you do manage to preserve life, but it can also be a bit of a hindrance for the forensics in the aftermath, which I think it was a little bit of that in this case, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so a bit of a hindrance, but again, there's nothing you can do. They're there to preserve the life of Saeed in this case. He was with his friends, and we'll kind of explain the series of events that unfolded in a second. But it's obviously important for us to talk about Saeed first of all. So he was effectively just round at his mate's house. They all knew him really well. One of the witnesses, one of the people that were there, was actually his uncle.
Yeah.
So he was with, people he was comfortable with, people he was familiar with, and he was known to be really polite and gentle. He'd actually come to the UK because of the civil war, the civil unrest in Somalia.
Yeah, this is really sad that he'd fled Somalia because of the danger over there and the violence, and then come to the UK thinking this was like his safe place, and then ended up being brutally murdered here.
Yeah, and again without any reason.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the same as, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There's just no rhyme or reason to it, is there?
No.
And his cousin had actually said, his cousin was called Jama, and his cousin actually said that they saw Britain as like a safe haven.
Safe haven, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is really sad.
But Saeed was polite, gentle, said to have hated violence, again, which is part of the reason they came over here, and was really kind of present within the community.
Yeah.
So he was very kind, really social, enjoyed the company of others, and was a bit of a leader, and would give back wherever he could in terms of, you know, with his family and within the community as well. So he thought, like he would, that when you are in a flat that you are familiar with people that you love,
yeah, and with your friends, you don't think anything bad is going to happen.
No.
And I think in this case it was a multi-occupancy residency.
Yes, it was.
So I think they sort of share the communal areas like the kitchen and the living room, but then off from that you all have your own rooms, a bit like student accommodation, isn't it, where you all share one certain area. So I'm guessing that at any one time there could be quite a lot of people in these
because it didn't look
residences.
small, did it? From the stuff that I saw, it looked like relatively big in terms of like the shared communal spaces.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there'll have been quite a lot of people coming, you know, sort of in and out in general, with it being, you know, quite a large place, and then that's also where they all meet up and socialise as well.
And it wasn't late, you know, it wasn't like 4 o'clock in the morning that this took place. It was kind of afternoon time as well, wasn't it? So if we go to the time of the event. So on the 16th of March 2020, as we said, maybe 3-4 o'clock, you've got a group of 8 people who are just sat chatting and then decided to have a drink.
Yeah.
There's nothing kind of untoward going on. There's no one that's causing havoc. It's not like a raging house party. It's just... they're just sat.
A gathering, isn't it? Yeah. And we've all been there as well, like in these situations, especially when I was at uni or when I was in a student house, you know, like you're all sat down, chilling, just want to say, oh, let's have a glass of wine, like get the wine out, and, you know, other people's friends would be coming in and out of the house. Like, it's such a normal thing to do.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those where if someone else does come in, you do just like offer them a
drink.
Like,
Yeah.
So the next thing that happened was that the offender, that we now know as the offender, kind of burst into the property without any real warning. I think, again, it was tricky because when I was looking into it, there was kind of CCTV of him coming into the property, but then one of the witnesses had said that he had knocked on the door, and it was actually Saeed that had answered the door to him. But again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary.
I thought it was quite calm on the CCTV when they saw him coming into the apartment or into the flat. It was sort of like he walked in, he chatted to someone else at the door.
Yeah.
He then went through to the kitchen, he got a drink. He was like not joining in with the gathering. He wasn't really part of that. He was sat separately in the kitchen. But what shocked me is there was absolutely no it's not like it was premeditated and he'd come around there like knowing what he was going to do, and he'd flown in and all havoc had broke loose. He just walked in, sat down, had a drink, chatted. It was like nothing was wrong. If you'd have seen that man walking in, you wouldn't have thought, oh, something's going to go down.
Yeah.
Which I think was it either means that it wasn't obviously premeditated and wasn't planned, and something happened
trigger it.
There to trigger it, or you never know how people react to drink. If they sit down and have a drink, how they're going to react to that. If one person has said something to agitate, like you just
don't know.
And in this case as well, we don't really get to know the circumstance.
You still don't know. No. So if we then go to the 999 call, so you tell us about that. So it was a woman that rang up, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it was one of his friends, a woman that rang up initially, but you could also hear other people in the background of the 999 call. And like we said earlier, they were very, very panicked, saying that someone had burst in, that someone had been stabbed. And it was, you could hear the pure panic, couldn't you? And they were saying, we think he's dead, he's dying, he's bleeding.
And they're reiterating that they need help now.
Yeah, can you get someone now? Like, please, we really, really need immediate help.
And I don't know about you, but when we get to listen to clips like this, now there is an element of me being suspicious of whoever the caller is, because we know that historically in other cases sometimes it is the offender that makes the 999 or 911 call. So I was kind of initially listening to it to see if there would be any strange responses. Obviously I look at it linguistically, so are they making any references to him already being dead, or it's one of those things, isn't it? But generally, and I know obviously hindsight is 2020, so we know that she had nothing to do with it, but she did just sound genuinely
concerned,
panicked.
Wasn't she? I think we think about these phone calls. I don't know if you relate back to the same case on the phone call situation from what Jennifer did. With her on the phone, and that's why now I do listen.
There's a couple that spring to mind for me, but that's definitely one of them.
So they were definitely very, very concerned, and like we said, the operator sent the paramedics out straight away. And even when the paramedics sort of arrived and got there, everyone was still panicked. They'd not left. His friends had stayed with him.
So I'd seen photos, and from some of the photos, I think there was 3 police vans. Because they don't know whether it's going to escalate. They don't know really what's happened. On the call, she'd said that she thought he'd been stabbed. But didn't know what had happened, really. So there was 3 big police vans. There was obviously then I think maybe 2 ambulance, and then police paramedics and first responder cars. So it did look, horrific from the outside.
From the outside, definitely.
And then obviously the first responders go in, and as you've already mentioned, they are just concerned with making sure that Saeed survives.
So preservation of life in this case. And it turns out that he had, they said on the 999 call, his friend was saying, I think he's been stabbed. And the operator said, well, where is he being stabbed? And he said, in the left side of his heart. And the other lady at first thought that he was being punched. But we do get that a lot of the time. A lot of people do think it's sort of just a fight, and then they only realise afterwards that it was actually with a knife from the wounds. And the paramedics came in, and when they were preserving life, they actually had to I can't remember what the medical term for it is, but they had to actually cut open his chest. So you can imagine even the wound area will have been probably quite distorted and cut into, and then you've got all the blood that is then around the body. And unfortunately, the paramedics didn't manage to save him, and he was actually pronounced dead at the scene.
By this time, unfortunately, Saeed's family had heard that something had gone on. Well, I couldn't really get to grips with. Well, I assume if his uncle was there, then he's
rang the family.
Has probably rung other members of the family.
Because the family got over quite quick, didn't they? Quite quick after the incident had happened. A lot of his family had immediately been there. So I'm guessing they were pretty local as well.
So once they had obviously then pronounced life extinct, which is what they would do at a crime scene, the forensic investigators can go in, and also there was it looked like a detective inspector had gone, and they said how chaotic the scene was.
Yeah, I feel like this is quite a chaotic scene, because you've got all the people that are there as witnesses. Mm-hmm. You've got that many people in there that the evidence is getting trampled over from the CSI's point of view.
Yeah.
You need to sort of get all the witnesses out and into one place to be interviewed. You then need to preserve the scene. And by this time, you've got to remember people were in there when the fight and the stabbing took place.
Yeah.
His friends were already in there. There was already 8 people in the house. More people came in. His family came in. The paramedics come in.
Yeah.
Like, that is a lot of evidence from the CSI's point of view that you've got to preserve.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of formulate a strategy for.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of scenes, they will do the formulating of the strategy prior to attending, but because of the rate in which this did escalate, they just had to get in there. And another thing to bear in mind is this is in Birmingham, and this is all about 5 o'clock. So there would have been a lot of people around the area just in general.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, with all of the services that arrived on scene, that is not something that you're just going to walk past without wondering what has happened.
Yeah, I think this would have probably attracted quite a lot of media attention as well, even from people just walking past the house, trying to find out what's happened, getting the phones out, getting the cameras out.
Yeah.
And I bet this case was one of those ones that made it onto social media quite quick.
Yes. And that's why, like, the inner and outer cordon is just so important, isn't it? Again, really difficult in this case because of how quickly everything developed.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so important to get stuff in place very quickly.
So in terms of actually starting the investigation, the first thing to do was all the witnesses that were at the location, to remove them from the house and get them straight in to being questioned. The only problem with this is, like we spoke about before on our witness episode, how reliable are witnesses in the first place, and whether that's intentionally or unintentionally. You've got to keep in mind now that the majority of these witnesses were under the influence of alcohol.
Yeah.
And in the police interviews, the police were saying to them at the beginning, on a scale of 1 to 10, so 10 being absolutely paralytic to 1 being not had a drink at all, on that scale, what would you say that you are? Because they needed to get them in and get their stories, but you can't wait for them to sober up because they needed it now. But it could also be discredited in court because they are under the influence.
Yeah,
so you're in a catch-22.
Yeah, exactly. It's a double-edged sword because you want to interview them to get the information because it will be more kind of present in their mind, but also you will have to question them again when they are sober.
Yeah.
And if that then changes, that can get discredited. So it's really difficult. But effectively what they said is exactly what we've already mentioned. It was all pretty chilled out. A couple of them had said they were maybe like 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how drunk they were. But they had just been sat, just chilling and having,
just having a chat, weren't they?
Lager. Yeah, basically. Yeah. So none of them saw it coming. One of the witnesses did mention the name of the offender as a possible suspect and said that no one had actually seen the attack unfold, but that she had walked in pretty immediately after the fact. And she had said that it looked like he'd been stabbed in his chest.
Yeah.
But again, she wasn't sure whether or not it was a stabbing at first. It was all very...
And up until this point, there wasn't actually a suspect, because when his friends made the 999 call, they weren't saying on the phone, it is, and then giving a name of the person. No. They were obviously more concerned about their friend.
Yeah.
So I think at first glance, the police were like, God, we haven't even got a suspect for this, and someone's just been stabbed in broad daylight, in the middle of the day, in like quite a populated area.
Yeah. Equally, they've not said we've got the offender here, we're trying to keep him, because that's another danger for the police, which you would want to do. If you've got an offender in the room, you'd want to keep them in the room, but then that can again escalate the situation.
And as well, at this point, when you are interviewing these witnesses, because there's quite a lot of them, you don't know if you're interviewing the witness or a suspect or a possible suspect. They could be saying, I was in the room, telling them what happened, and it could have been them that had done it.
Yeah, and if you think just from like a practical perspective, how long it would take to corroborate that information.
Yeah.
So you've got 8 or 9 different people being interviewed, maybe simultaneously, but again, depends on staffing. It depends on how many people they've got out investigating. So you might have 2 interviews going on at the same time for 8 people. If you're in there for an hour while they are regaling this horrific thing that's just happened, if you think of the amount of hours, I mean, I'm bad at math, so we're not going to actually work it out. But if you think of the amount of hours it would take to just interview them, then you've got to relay that information to maybe the other people that have been also conducting the interviews, and then see if those witness statements align. Then only at that point can you actually start looking into any of it and investigating.
It's a lot of time already, isn't it? The more sort of witnesses that you've got, the more time it's taken. And even if all these witnesses, like we said in the witness episode, even if people have seen the exact same event happen, we will describe it differently. If me and you had seen the exact same thing, you went in one room, I went in another, we would not say that different things had happened. We would probably get the gist of it, but it will have happened differently for both of us. And that now, to get these to sort of all corroborate, I can imagine being a bit of a task.
So again, at this stage, we have Saeed has been murdered. He's been stabbed. We've now got a witness that has named a potential suspect. So it looks, you've got 8 other people that were there. You've got 8 other witness statements. So it kind of looks pretty open and shut at this case. It looks like you've got your victim, we've got our potential offender, and we've got a lot of evidence in eyewitness testimony to back it up. But that's not the case. It's never as easy as that. So now what we need to find is more information about the offender. How well known the offender was to Saeed to, potentially understand motive, if there was motive.
And if he was known to the police in general.
And then when the forensic investigators go in, they will understand that, yes, you might have eyewitness testimony from multiple people, but that alone won't stand in court, especially because they've been under the influence.
You need a lot more to back that up, don't you?
So it's forensic evidence that's pretty difficult or impossible to argue, and that's what they then went in to find.
So I mean, at this point, you would be sending CSIs, obviously, to the crime scene to start doing their search and gathering the evidence, recording the evidence. But then also parallel to this, there is also the suspect that was named as Ali Abdullahi, and you need to find out where he is. You need to track his movements. It's almost as if there's 2 investigations now. It's split into 2 and there's 2 running side by side. So it's sort of like going down the CCTV route and tracking the suspect, and then going down the forensic route and trying to find out what actually happened.
And because we can't assume anything at this stage, at any stage really, but you don't know whether or not she is just putting a name out there.
Is he the
to
suspect?
Throw them off. They've also got to, they've got to think of all options.
There's a lot to take into consideration, isn't there?
So there's a hell of a lot to do. So if we think about what the forensic investigators would go in there and do, you'd have the crime scene coordinator initially go in, and they, as far as I could identify, they weren't actually sure whether or not the attack had taken place in the same room of the flat as they were investigating, as his body was in. And obviously, as we've mentioned, because the first responders had been involved, there was a lot in the room. It was a bedroom that he was in, and they weren't sure whether or not that was Saeed's bedroom. They didn't know whether the blood that was there was due to them trying to save him, how much of it was due to his injuries.
And did you notice that the feet were raised onto a chair?
Yes.
And I thought, as straight away, thinking like forensically, I thought, oh, was that the paramedics that did that? Or have they managed to leave him in the position that he was, and did he fall like that?
Yeah.
And I still didn't really get an answer for that throughout.
No, I thought the same as you, probably paramedics.
Yeah, paramedics had elevated.
Yeah, especially if they're performing that procedure kind of thing.
Yeah.
And again, the forensic investigators wouldn't really know. The CSIs have not got time really to be asking all of those questions.
Yeah.
They've just got to, find whatever evidence they can. And so obviously quite a bloody scene with a stabbing.
Yeah.
But there was also blood on the door handle and on the door.
Yeah. I think when crime scene investigators do find blood at a crime scene, when I've spoke to them before, they've said, we love finding stuff like that because it is a really good form of evidence. It stands up well in court because obviously from blood you can get DNA. So then you have to obviously go about how to test it and how to swab it. But this one was a little bit different, wasn't it? Because the blood on the door handle was a piece of evidence in itself, but there was also what they thought was a fingerprint within the blood on the door handle. So you've sort of got two pieces of evidence in one. And normally when you get blood at a crime scene, you can do the like wet or dry swabs or the wet and dry swabs and just take a swab of the area. But in this case, if you take a swab of the area, you don't want to damage the fingerprint that's in there as well.
No,
so
it's
like
really difficult.
The methodology of like which way you would do it methodically is very, very important in this case.
Yeah,
because
massively.
You'd want to be photographing, make sure you've got every photograph that you need before you then swab the blood and damage it.
And the process of identifying, because, we've just said like, oh, there was blood at the scene. Like, obviously, yes, you're going to have blood within a stabbing case, but they have to conduct presumptive blood tests. They can't just say like, oh yeah, write down blood here, blood there.
Yep.
You've got to do presumptive blood tests. That does not then tell you whose blood it belongs to. Now, what we know about stabbing cases is that in a lot of circumstances, the weapon itself actually becomes wet with blood as the offender is using the weapon. And in some cases, their hand then slips as they're committing the offence, and they then become injured. So you then do have a mixture, potentially, of the victim's blood, but then also the offender's blood.
Yeah.
So this is where blood spatter experts and analysts are so important, because, how do you differentiate between your victim's blood and your offender's blood?
And when there's that much blood at the crime scene as well, it's all right doing a presumptive blood test. Like we've said, that will confirm if you have blood at your crime scene, if this swab that you've in fact took is blood. We've also got to take into consideration there are a few things for false positives and things like that for blood testing. And jumping the gun a little bit, which we'll come back to, we talk a lot about presumptive blood testing at crime scenes, and so many people always talk about Castlemayer, and I don't like using the Castlemayer method because you take a swab of the blood and you do what we call the Castlemayer test, and it is with peroxide and a reactive agent.
Yeah.
And it turns the swab pink. But I always find it does turn it bright pink, so you can see that there's a colour change. But I just feel like the blood, the colour of the blood and the pink is too close of a colour.
Yeah.
And everyone always bangs on about this test. Anyway, I was very, very happy to see the lady using the leucomalacite green.
Yeah.
Because to me, that is just a immediate change. You can just see the colour change immediately. There's no is it, isn't it? It's a drastic change.
And it's when the reactive agent works when it's exposed to oxygen as well, doesn't it? So you have to factor in the fact...
A time scale?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has to be within a couple of minutes, otherwise you then might get a false positive. But again, people assume that we are just doing presumptive blood tests out at the crime scene, but they do actually do that back in the labs as well. It's not like we just do everything at the crime scene and then forensic testing post.
Just at the lab, yeah.
So... Again, with blood and then potentially a fingerprint in the blood, is that your offender's blood that they've then put, like, that's dripped off them and then they've put their own finger in it? Or have you got both? Have you got victim's blood and then you've got offender's fingerprint? You just don't know. Equally with the amount of people that were in the scene.
So that's what I thought was the blood there, and someone, could have been the family entering the room, exiting the room. It could have been the offender. It could have been the friends. It could have been paramedics. How many people could have touched that handle?
And you've got so many possibilities. There are over 500 different ways of like lifting and developing fingerprints, but the one thing that you've got to consider is that with quite a lot of fingerprints that get analysed from different pieces of evidence, you can look at the ridge detail in quite high level of detail.
Yeah.
But in blood, it's not going to pick up the minutiae characteristics like it would do with some of the other methods. So, yes, a fingerprint in blood is good, but you're working from a photograph then, and it's a lot more difficult to get those minutiae.
Yeah, and enhance it as well. I'm guessing it'd be a lot more difficult.
Which is why they then send it off to the experts. So there was the blood at the scene. There was also a mobile phone.
Yeah.
So that then obviously gets handed straight over to digital forensics.
The mobile phone was taken straight from Saeed's pocket. So they said that we'll send this to digital forensics and we know that it's most likely not being tampered with or not being interrupted by anyone because we've taken it directly from him. Yeah. But then they also thought about the struggle at the scene in general and thought, well, we'll swab under his fingernails. So under Saeed's fingernails, they took the swabs and sent those off as well, because if there has been some sort of fight or some type of struggle, you would expect the suspect's DNA to be under fingernails. The first thing you think of is to, even if you've grabbed them, you've punched them, you've scratched them.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be kind of that violent in terms of transfer sometimes, does it? Especially not for skin cells. Even if you brush past someone or, sometimes if someone's got hair, you might like brush the hair off them. Yeah. Even just simple, like something as simple as that, you might then have their skin cells. Yeah. So swabbing under the fingernails is a really valuable,
brilliant example of Lockhardt's principle there,
Beth. It is, thank you.
But then here, when the CSI is searching this scene, there's still no murder weapon found. And I think that is the thing they were hoping for the most out of this, to be able to actually find the knife and look for the evidence.
And again, if
knife.
It's kind of, it sounds like it is just an unprovoked, spur of the moment attack. Yeah. So you would potentially think that the weapon would just get discarded in a hurry. Yeah. Especially if someone has witnessed it kind of just after it's happened. Yeah. That there might potentially be, it just be there, just discarded.
I was actually quite worried when they didn't find a murder weapon, because this, like we've said, an unprovoked attack, is something set him off and then he's left with the murder weapon. And just think of the danger to, we've also said about it being broad daylight, people out and about outside. Is it something that, is trying to kill more than one person? Yeah. Are the general public at danger? Where is he going with that knife? So as a crime scene investigator or as a detective, you would be really worried about, the wider danger than just this crime scene if you've not already found the murder weapon.
And the female witness did say that she didn't see the stabbing occur, but she did think that it looked like a kitchen knife that had been used in the attack. So, again, not finding that kitchen knife.
Yeah, it's worrying, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Worrying just for safety in general.
Yeah. There was also again, from looking at the pictures, the scene looked quite, what's the word? Apart from obviously the middle of the room, which is where Saeed was, everything around that did look just, it was just a normal bedroom.
Yeah.
There was, like, I noticed some dipper base on the side, which is like
did you?
cream. Yeah. And it didn't look like anyone had been sat in there. It wasn't, again, not like a house party where you get a few people sat having a drink on someone's bed.
Yeah.
It kind of didn't make sense as to why it had all occurred in there almost to me. It didn't seem to make sense. But from what they knew, because this offender hadn't really been sat drinking with them for much time, they'd come in and sat in the room, but they'd not really been drinking like the others had.
Yeah.
They didn't know how much value to place on the evidence of the like glasses and stuff like that, did they?
Yeah.
And that's something that you've got to then weigh up.
Got to prioritise, haven't you, which you think is going to be, which is going to give you the best results and the best evidence to present then in court.
Yeah, yeah. But they did take I think it was like a Carlin or a Foster's can.
Yeah.
And processed that.
Yeah.
And that did then have multiple fingerprints on it. But again, impressions of prints that they then had to determine as to what finger they've come from. Sometimes you just get print pattern, so it could have come from part of the palm.
Palm print,
and if you've got prints on prints, which is very difficult to identify, again, it's a lot more complicated than saying, yeah, that's just first finger or second finger.
Yeah, and if they are like with a can, you've got so many people that will have picked up that can. You've got the people who have stocked the shelves in the supermarket. You've got the people who will have then put it in the bags at the checkout.
Yeah.
You've then got people who've picked it up and put it back in the supermarket.
Yeah, whoever's then...
You've got the offender who's picked it up to drink out of it. You've got the person who's handed it. There's so many fingerprints overlaying each other, and it is so hard to separate those out individually. So she did a really good job, the fingerprint expert, in deciphering which way up was the can, because the fingerprints came in and they'd got the arrow, the gravity arrow. So she knew which way was facing up, and from this she could work out which was the bottom of the can. And she actually used her own hand, didn't she, to put it on, and she like decided that it was the left hand of the can that he'd picked it up with. And with that, something that she didn't mention, you could also, I would have been thinking then at this point, is the offender left-handed, because he's picked the can up and he's drank with his left hand. And also, would you be swabbing the top for DNA as well, obviously, if they've had a drink out of there. But in this, like, we've obviously got the root of the evidence, and then we've also got the root of the suspect that we've not touched upon yet. Yeah,
so in terms of gaining as much information about the suspect as possible, they actually ran his name, obviously, through the database.
Yeah.
And all that came back was some, like, previous driving offences. He'd never been known for any violent attacks, never any, like, drunken disorderly.
Yeah, it weren't anything too extreme, was it?
No. So the next port of call then becomes CCTV footage.
Yeah, and luckily within the complex where all this took place, there was CCTV in the hallway. There was CCTV covering part of the kitchen as well, which I thought was quite strange, because I know you're in a multi-occupancy residency, but I wouldn't have, if someone had put cameras up in the living room of my student accommodation, I wouldn't have been that impressed.
I know what you mean,
And I thought, that's a bit strange. But in this case, it was the
really...
hallway, the entrance hall bit, and then also the kitchen, which gave very, very clear CCTV that the suspect was actually in the house at the time, that he had entered the house, he had sat in the kitchen, and that is how they got the information about the Foster's or the beer can, because they'd seen him on CCTV, someone hand him the can, taking a drink, and then he walked down the stairs and went out of the house, didn't they?
But to me, that was interesting straight away, because as soon as you see a potential offender leaving the scene, if you see anyone leaving the scene initially, unless they are leaving to shout it from the rooftops on the street that something
they need help.
Horrendous has occurred, why would you leave?
He was very calm in leaving as well. Like walking down those stairs, there wasn't any major panic or urgency. It was all like very just left the scene of a crime. And like you said, you'd want to, even if you knew of that person, you didn't actually know them properly, even if you didn't know them, if it was a friend of a friend, you would stay and check on them, make sure the police had got the information they needed. Did you see anything? Yeah. You know, to leave the scene in general is very suspicious.
Even if you... I love it when it's so suspicious.
I know, I always think of it in Cardi B voice. That's suspicious.
So, again, even if you really struggle, obviously it's a horrific thing to see. So even if you were struggling with it, you would still think that you would kind of collar someone outside and say like, look, I'm more than happy to give a witness statement, but I can't.
But I can't be around that. I can't see it. Like, that's just knocked me sort of thing.
Yeah. So no, I thought that was odd that they had left the scene. So while all this is going on, they are looking at the CCTV, and then they're also looking on Saeed's mobile to try and identify whether or not he knew the offender.
Yeah, Saeed's mobile was a bit of a strange one though, really, wasn't it? Because he had a mobile phone, but it was like a burner phone, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And they plugged it in, and she even said, oh, we had to plug it in like the old school way.
Yeah.
It weren't a USB connection. It was like an old lead that connected it. And the thing with digital forensics, they can download the information from digital devices, phones, tablets, computers, laptops, anything. And go through it, but it didn't look like Saeed particularly used his phone that much, did it?
No, they'd been at mine for months, because it takes me 2 or 3 days. I've got probably like 4 unread messages at the minute of people that I've just not got round to replying to yet. Like,
mine's the same at the moment with us being so hectic.
Yeah, but in this case, it kind of didn't give any insight, really, did it?
I think the last call or message was something like 10 days prior. So it's not like he was on his phone all the time. It's not even like he'd rang anyone to arrange this gathering.
No, it's not like there was anyone. Yeah, and it wasn't like there'd been any messages to say like, oh, why don't you come round?
Yeah.
Like,
I think they said there was a voicemail, but it was from like New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, like the previous year. So, he wasn't big on really bothering using his phone, was he?
But again, that's why the CCTV became so crucial, because if we're not getting any extra information from digital forensics in that sense, in the sense of the mobile phone, then you need to know where your offender or your suspect has then moved. And
I think in a normal case, when you get someone's mobile phone, you think, oh, this is going to link so much of it together, because we can find out if the suspect knew the victim, if there was any contact between them. But in this case...
there had been like one text between them, but even from that text, I don't know what the text was, but it didn't seem to...
There weren't anything...
like indicate the relationship that the two of them had.
Yeah, it was sort of like they knew each other briefly, knew of each other, maybe through friends, but didn't directly.
And again, if it was like a landlord, you'd expect maybe money reference or house reference or something, but there didn't seem to be anything that would
really
give anything.
Was there?
No.
And that's why in this case they had to rely on the CCTV so much, and that's why when I saw the CCTV and the quality of it, I was like, thank God for that, because so far they've not really got much else to go on, have they?
So they then used CCTV from the local area to gain a better insight as to their suspect's actions after having left the property. And they actually managed to capture the suspect leaving the property, walking down the road, again pretty nonchalant, didn't seem kind of rushed or anything, and then withdrawing money from an ATM. So at this point, again, you'll then have investigators that are looking into bank records, to see how much money has been withdrawn.
And where he's gone afterwards, if he's paid, looking at your bank records, I know he's drawn out cash here, but if he has paid on card somewhere, like, just tapping your card on, it's so easy to do now, isn't it? If that's shown up anywhere where they can sort of trace him further. Because at this point, it is basically a manhunt for... The suspect.
For the suspect.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, despite the witness statements, there wasn't really any other leads. They were under the impression that, this was their offender and it's just a matter of tracking them down to be able to speak to them.
Yeah, and get their statement, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he's made himself look a little bit suspicious by leaving the scene in the first place, hasn't he? But it's still all worrying at this stage, especially for the detectives. The quicker you get the suspect and get that person into custody, the safer it is for everyone at this point.
Yeah.
So while all like the CCTV footage is being analysed and the police and detectives are sort of following it down that route, there is also evidence that is in the lab, like obviously the blood.
Yeah.
The blood swabs are in the lab. They're being tested for DNA. And the blood that was found on the door handle, I found this quite interesting how she knew, but the... forensic specialist said that she thought that the blood was already on the door handle and then someone had then touched the door handle, leaving their print in it, rather than the blood being on the hand and transferred to the door handle. Yeah. And I thought, that's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not a blood expert, but blood pattern and blood spatter analysis is something that does interest me, even though it's not my sort of field of work. So when she was saying that, I was like, I wonder how she knows this.
I think it's something to do, but I could be wrong, with the movement of the blood, like the way it almost grips to certain parts. If you imagine, if you put like a sweaty fingerprint on water, you know how the water kind of moves and it might get stuck to the sweatiest parts. I think it's something about the way that the blood travels, almost like moves. Yeah.
So she said that she was struggling to see any characteristics at all, and she could only see 5 of the ridges within that blood pattern, and therefore that fingerprint in blood was not able to be identified as anyone's.
No, because again, it's the minutiae characteristics that they have to be looking at. So yes, you've got ridge detail, and that gives you the overall pattern.
But it's what's in between, isn't it? So the characteristics are within your fingerprint patterns. So it's what makes ours individual to like another one with a similar pattern. So it's not just as straightforward as just looking and saying, this has got the same pattern as this. It's so much more in detail, isn't it? So unfortunately, there wasn't any identification from the fingerprint in blood. Yeah.
However, so Wednesday now, so this is 2 days later, 2 days after the offence, they then had a massive breakthrough.
Yeah.
Kind of bolt out of the blue, really. Obviously, all of this is going on in the meantime, but in terms of significant leads, they were struggling. But they'd obviously put in America they call it a bolo, a be on the lookout. But they'd obviously alerted on the home system for all of the different forces to be aware of a potential suspect.
Yeah.
And they'd actually flagged him up as trying to leave the country, but in London.
They were cutting it fine with this, I've got to say. I mean, it was very, very fine. I think they literally got him from the Heathrow airport, but literally boarding the plane.
Yeah.
Like, how close was that to him taking off? And I mean, I suppose if they knew that he'd taken off, I'm guessing the officers would fly out and meet them at the other end.
But then you've got to contend with the embassy.
All sorts. So he was actually boarding a flight to Ethiopia.
Yeah. So what happened then is obviously arrested by the police force in London, but then was transferred up to West Midlands to then be questioned, because it's them that have obviously got all the prep work.
And know about the case as well.
Yeah. And so in terms of questioning, you can't just have anyone question the offender.
In terms of the questioning, I felt like he came across pretty cold.
Oh.
And why did he have the patch on his eye?
So apparently that was a prior medical.
Something happened before.
But they obviously, if you take someone in for questioning, so when you take someone in for questioning, they took a cheek swab for his DNA, took a photograph.
Yeah, that's very posh.
A photograph from him. They'll take any antecedent markers, so like tattoos and things, and then suspect's clothes. And in this case, the clothes that they actually managed to take were what matched to the CCTV evidence they've got.
Yeah.
But if you arrest someone and they've got an injury, even if it's from something prior, they have to seek medical attention first prior to the questioning.
So that's why he got a clean patch
on
his eye.
Because it might be, obviously, you don't want him to collapse mid-interview.
Yeah.
But 2, then you don't want them to use it mid-questioning if they're getting uncomfortable and say, oh, my eye's really hurting, I need
use it as an excuse.
Yeah.
In this, though, with the questioning, he stayed silent all the way through. He basically didn't really say anything, did he, to start with?
So before any of that, when he'd sought medical attention, or they'd got it for him to check on his eye, but then he wasn't allowed to make any comments while he was being like processed into custody, but then was allowed to seek legal advice prior to going into the interview room. So when he actually went in and was really vague, he'd actually already got a legal representative at that point. So he'd got legal representation, and I thought, so I wouldn't have said cold. I'd have said, like, again, quite blasé, a bit like on that CCTV footage, as if, like, you know, it wasn't a horrific thing that had happened. But also, I didn't think he was, like, belligerent, or he just, like, when the police officers initially were speaking to him and saying, you know, we're going to question you about this, you were at this address on this day, he's kind of nodding along and like, well, are you happy for us to question you about this? And he was kind of nodding along, not saying anything, but he didn't.
I just thought he was dead behind the eyes. Well, the one eye that was showing. He seemed very and I don't know if that was down to having the legal representation, because she was quite hardcore, wasn't she?
Yeah.
You know, when the police were questioning, she was coming back and saying, well, we want to know what evidence you've got. Yeah. I've asked you for the evidence. You haven't given me the evidence, and my client's not going to say anything.
Yeah.
And she was even speaking outside of the interview, wasn't she? As well, from what I saw in a few interviews.
And officers had said to him that they'd got witness statements from the attack. They had got CCTV to kind of prove he was at the scene.
Yeah.
So they were pretty upfront from the off, because again, you don't have to tell them everything.
Yeah.
But they were pretty open about the information that they'd got so far, and were basically asking him to, because again, they try and get the suspect on side, don't they? So they'd said, you know, this is your interview. If you can prove that your trip to Ethiopia was already
pre-planned,
was pre-planned, was already booked, that it's not suspicious like it certainly looks, then fair enough. Like, this is your chance to do so.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it now, it is going to look more suspect later down the line. You know, it's going to look worse for you if you don't
tell us now,
if you don't give us any information. But as you mentioned, then just didn't say anything. So it wasn't even no comment, was it? It was just
nothing.
Remained silent. Completely.
Literally silent.
Yeah.
So the clothes were taken to go and have a look for any stains or any blood that was on there, and his mobile phone was actually taken too.
Yeah, one thing as well. So obviously stayed silent the whole time, but did you notice that at the end, again, when the officers were like, so just to confirm, you understood all the questions that we've asked you?
Yeah, and he nodded.
You're happy, you don't want to add anything? He was like, nope. Well, he didn't say no, but he like nodded as if to say, like, it's all fine.
Yeah.
Not bothered.
And they were like, the cameras are there, just, are you nodding? And he was like, nodding his head, wasn't he? Yeah.
It was weird, because although he'd obviously, yes, maybe the legal representation had kind of specified, that he shouldn't say anything, but he did seem...
He was giving off some signals, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the mobile phone went off to digital forensics, the same as before, where it gets plugged in, they download all the information from the phone, and he did have a more updated phone than Saeed. So they had a look on there and they were looking for, like we've said, anything that would make his trip to Ethiopia pre-planned, like when he booked the tickets. If there was any messages between people, if there was any messages between him and the victim. And
there was a slight, wasn't there? There was a slight link, but again, pretty vague.
It was all pretty... not as... I thought they were going to get a little bit more from him.
All it was a text. And again, don't know who from, that's not been specified, but a text with the address of the European embassy out in Ethiopia. Ethiopia.
Yeah.
So...
Oh, I thought it was the British embassy in London that was on the text message. I'm sure the address said Knightsbridge for some reason.
Oh, maybe then. I'm sure it was an Ethiopian, because they were like, oh, okay, this is trying to flee.
Yeah, trying to flee the country.
Yeah. And obviously then if they went out there, like we mentioned, if they flew him out there to arrest him, he could then say, hang on.
Yeah. So as the phone was being looked at, they got the little bit of evidence that they could from there, and the clothing then went into the lab, and there was quite a few stains found on the clothing. So what happens is the clothing comes in and it was quite dark coloured to start with, so the forensic experts started going over it with a sort of a magnifying glass, really, just to identify where any stains were. And this is not to say that every stain is blood. This is looking for a stain on the material.
Because again, you said dark coloured there. That's classic us. Because it was just a black jumper, wasn't it? Like a black coat. It
was, yeah.
But we say dark coloured because you don't know until it's been tested.
Yeah, and imagine how hard it is to try and find... stains on that. It's not like it's a white or light coloured and you can see it there in front of you.
And I think this is what people kind of don't factor in. It's almost as if and again, probably because of what you see on telly and it all happens in an hour, you imagine that they just kind of put a bit like when you're at the airport and it goes through the, what do you call them, the machines.
Yeah, and they can see.
And they just see everything straight away. I think people kind of assume that it just through.
Yeah, it's quite a long process, isn't it?
Yeah, it could be hours that they are staring at this one garment. Again, going over it with a microscope, going over it with a magnifying glass, and then testing any tiny microscopic traces.
So for the presumptive blood testing, is what they would do is fold up a filter paper, and the point of it, the very tip, they
just to note there, not filter paper like people that smoke. They'll be like, oh, like a filter.
Oh, not see, because that. I've always been in science, I never think of it like that.
So not like a long filter paper. Similar in terms of thin, but if you remember from science, they often
go back
use
to
the
school.
Circle.
Go back to your school days.
They often use the circles, and effectively they can then cut it into 4, can't they? They can do a little fan shape into 4.
Yeah, you fold it, not cut it.
Yeah.
You sort of fold it over and fold it over again. And it's how you make a funnel in science at school. So when you did the paper in the top of the funnel, if you remember that far back. And it's just the point of that you use to sort of rub on the area where you think there is blood. And then as you open it out, you can then do the presumptive test on there. And then it is in the centre of the piece of paper, so you're not getting it on the edge or anything like that. The colour will change right in the centre. And in this case, she did quite a few of the presumptive tests, quite a few swabs, and a lot of them did come back negative because they were obviously other things.
Yeah.
And after quite a while, she then did get a positive result for blood.
It was a potential positive, wasn't it? It was not a full positive.
It didn't turn very from what I could see on the samples, it didn't turn that bright of a green as what I've seen before. So it was like
it's like
very
it could
small
potentially
amount.
Be really valuable evidence.
Yeah.
But we're not then sure.
So then when you get a positive or potential for a presumptive, that's when you can take the actual samples. So in this case, she did the wet and the dry swabs. And that would be then obviously tested and sent off for DNA extraction, DNA analysis.
And in this case, that specific swab did then come back positive, and it was positive for Saeed's blood. So victim's blood is now on the offender's clothing. So before, you might have like evidence to, like the CCTV, the witness statements, that's evidence to prove that the offender's been at the scene.
Yeah.
But you can't just have proof that they've been at the scene. You need proof that they've committed the offence.
To link them to the actual offence.
The attack, yeah. And blood on the suspect's clothing is so far pretty much the best piece of evidence, or the only piece of evidence really to do that.
And the other piece of evidence which was really good was the fingerprint from the can, which we touched on earlier. And the fingerprint expert actually found 25 characteristics that matched, and the scar that went through the middle. So she could say, she basically said 100% that it was a match for the suspect on the can. At this point, they have got quite a bit of evidence building up. So to start with, they literally had nothing, and now it's sort of starting to come together, maybe in unexpected ways and unexpected pieces of evidence. So Abdullahi is actually charged at this point from the evidence that they've got, but they still need to find the murder weapon. So they've got him at the scene. They've got some of the blood on his clothing. But they've still not got this murder weapon. And I think the detectives were thinking this would be the sort of, thing that maybe could link all the evidence together.
To bring it all together.
Because you've got to think about what you're going to put across to a jury. And remember that the jury are normal people. And you've got to convince them without reasonable doubt. So the murder weapon is quite a key piece of evidence that's missing.
And he's clearly not saying anything in interview, so he's not going to give it away. Equally, if you think about CCTV, they couldn't see that he'd left the scene with a weapon. Nor did you see any evidence of him like heading over to a bin and putting anything in a bin. So they had another look at the crime scene, didn't they?
They actually sent a specialist search team to the crime scene, and this is after the crime scene investigators have been in and done their thing. The specialist team would then go in afterwards and do like a fine tooth comb search through everything and anything that is at the scene. So they're brought in after, and they did actually find a bag in there which had the handle of a knife, and at the moment they don't know if this is the murder weapon, it's just a knife handle sort of thing. And then under the dressing table they found a broken blade. So those two things would then be brought in and go straight in for testing. So there's quite a lot that you want to look at on this knife. So you've got the blood, you want to have a look and see if there is blood on the knife blade or on the handle. And then due to the material on the handle being, like having grooves or
quite
being
coarse,
patterned, you could also look on there for cellular material. So you might have got any sweat, any skin cells that have been on there. So it's not just blood that you're looking for the other cellular material too.
And they weren't sure whether there was tissue either on there, which again we can get DNA from. So quite a lot to look at. Also, the fact that this knife looks like it's in two parts does kind of indicate force behind the attack.
And also, do the two parts match together? As in one, it's like a jigsaw, isn't it? Putting the pieces back together.
So again, they put all of the different elements through like rigorous testing, and the knife handle had actually or was proven to have been touched by the suspect, Abdullahi.
Yeah.
So there were skin cells present which confirmed his DNA.
Yeah, on the handle, and then on the blade, the blood testing came back and that showed positive for Saeed's blood.
Yeah.
So in there you've got the suspect and the victim's DNA both on one thing, which links them both together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at this point, they've got quite a lot of evidence, and they feel it is sufficient enough to be presented to a jury. And the trial actually lasted for 2 weeks. And the jury came back really quick. It was like an hour.
Yeah, for it to get to court didn't take too long either, really, did it?
No.
But yeah, in terms of the sentencing.
Yeah, normally the jury take longer to deliberate.
Yeah.
And they only took an hour, which I think it is very quick in terms of something like murder. And Ali Abdullahi was found guilty of murder, and he was 41 at this point, and he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. And from his family statements, which I could see, they had said they did feel like that was a good sentence, and they did feel like justice had been served in that case.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's still, despite the whole court case, there's still really no clear motive. Not from any of the witnesses. He didn't give any indication of why the attack had occurred.
It's horrible for the family, isn't it, to just not have, there's just no specific reason to it.
No.
It just didn't need to happen.
Yeah, just thoughtless. A thoughtless attack. So Saeed's mother did actually give a statement. Her name is Fatima. And she stated that she wanted to thank the police again on behalf of the family and herself, and said that, she understood that it was a really difficult job and that it was really hard.
Yeah.
But that without them, they'd have never received justice. Yeah. And they did feel that justice had kind of been served.
Yeah.
And then also said that she wanted to thank them all for their help and support in their darkest time, which I thought was really nice, because again, often the police get thanked for the work but not the compassion, maybe so much. So I thought it was really nice that they valued that just as highly, and obviously said that they would never forget it. And she actually said, thank you so much, and we will always love you, to the team. So I thought that was really lovely. But yes, so an interesting case today, because as we said at the beginning, it's one of those where it seems pretty open and shut in terms of, here's the offender, people have seen it, go catch him.
But that they started off without a suspect, without evidence, without anything, and then managed to build this case around it all and managed to get the suspect sentenced to 22 years.
Yeah. So thankfully, the family feel like they've had justice. Saeed, it seems, was an incredible human and didn't deserve to have his life taken from him. But hopefully we've now, again, given him a bit of a voice and we've shed some light on the case. And another thing that we've mentioned in other episodes is just how much making one wrong decision can impact the rest of your life. And if this isn't a case that demonstrates that, I don't know what is.
It does.
So there you go. So we'll leave it on that one for now. If you haven't already, make sure you leave us a review. We're getting a few more comments through now on YouTube and stuff like that. But again, feel free to comment on our TikTok, Instagram,
let
Facebook.
us know what episodes you like. Let us know which is your favourite, and we can do more of those for you. And leave us reviews, comments, likes, shares, anything. It all helps, doesn't it?
And in the meantime, we will see you next week.
Bye.
Take care.